This is the Sales Bible Podcast, episode 253, How to Win the Game with a Sales Playbook, an interview with Rod Feuer.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers. And last week we heard advice from John Reed that our selling must go from models to mindset. Well, today we're going to turn that conversation around and look at it from a different perspective of going from mindset to models. Consider the possibility of not just having a model to base your selling process, but a playbook, a step-by-step playbook like we have in sports that tells you exactly what to say and when to say it. Our guest today is Rod Feuer. He's the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of Costello. Rod believes that the best way to have the right first-time conversation with a prospect is to tip the scales in your favor with a sales playbook. Rod helps sellers navigate key conversations in the moment and qualifies those prospects with the critical deal information so that we can keep those opportunities advancing to a close. So, with no further ado, let's get to it. Welcome, Rod. You ready to babble?
I am ready. Thank you.
Rod, you and I were talking a couple weeks ago. We had actually met on LinkedIn through some common friends, and you were chatting about something what you call sales playbooks. What's a sales playbook?
Right. There's a few different kinds. I think it's important to think about two different kinds of playbooks. There's the playbook that typically you can work on oftentimes with a sales consultant or a trainer where you're really kind of mapping out your core sales strategy. That includes things like identifying your core personas, understanding your talk tracks and your value props that line up with those personas, what the challenges are that they have, how your product helps solve them, and basically just developing your core value prop, how you build lead lists and things like that. You might even get into more detail like, hey, what does your process look like when you do prospecting? What does your outreach cadence look like in terms of number of calls you make or the emails that you send and the frequency with which you do that? So a combination of strategy and process. So that's kind of like a typical playbook. It gets put into a Word document. It gets put into a PowerPoint. It gets put into a PDF.
Right.
There's another
that
kind
makes
of
sense, too.
Yeah.
It's the kind of things I do with my clients. Right.
That's right. And those are wonderful, right? You've got to do the work to understand, to give your reps some ammunition to perform well. There's another kind of playbook that is newer, right? And I'm speaking to our own book here in terms of conversation playbooks, which is that strategy work is wonderful. The key question becomes, how do you put your reps in the best possible position to perform when it matters most, which is when they're actually talking to customers. So creating a dynamic playbook, a conversational playbook that helps guide them through calls in the most critical moments, something I want to come back to, so that they can improve their chances of getting that deal to the next stage and ultimately to close.
It guides them through calls. Like, what would this look like? And
yeah. So when you think about, there's two classic types of calls at the beginning of a sales cycle. If you think about it, one of them is your classic outbound prospecting call. And let me just tell you about the framework here, and this is kind of sets the stage for a playbook, right? So typically when you're making an outbound call, it's a cold call. You call up and you say, hey, this is Rod Costello. Did I catch it at a bad time? You can launch into your pitch, which is basically your core value prop, but in an attention grabber, right?
Right.
And then oftentimes you either ask straight away for, I'd love to find time to talk to you about how we can help you do X, or you might ask a thought-provoking, open-ended question, starting with a how or starting with a what. Never a why. Why puts people on the defensive. And then typically what happens is that someone, they don't know who you are, and so they kind of throw an objection at you or some kind of a response. And there's usually 4 or 5 of those. After a few calls, you figure out what they are and think of those as like different paths you can go down in a call. And then depending on how you handle that path, you ultimately get a chance to ask them to schedule that meeting again and then kind of hang up the phone. So if you think about it, that's essentially the structure of what a playbook can look like, a conversation playbook where you're giving your reps the best possible set of words to use at the beginning of a call and giving them a way to say, okay, based on what response I'm getting from the prospect, I need to answer back with the best possible response right? That I've come up with, that my team and I've come up with. It could be asking a reframing question. It could be telling a customer story and then asking a reframing question.
I'd like to step in here for 1 second and define this term reframing question that Rod mentions a number of times throughout the interview. A reframing question is one that sees the current situation from a different perspective, which can be tremendously helpful when conversing with a prospect and helping them to see the situation from a different point of view. Like, for example, let's say a customer says that they like the trustworthiness of an old technology, but you could reframe the conversation in the context of the cost savings or the increased quality of the new tech. These are benefits above and beyond what they are used to experiencing.
It's just whatever tactics have been proven to work, and these are things that you iterate on. Another point we'll come back to. It's essentially giving them something to use while on the call to guide them through those key moments, because those are the moments where if you get them right, you get the meeting. If you don't get them right, you don't get the meeting, and those are kind of the key moments in the call.
So that was one direction. You said the other direction was?
Yeah, it's similar. Just typically when you have more of an inbound qualification call, or if you have a discovery call, if you're an account executive, you've already earned the right to have a conversation. And so, a typical flow of that call is, you want to make sure you're setting the table up front. You have your shared agenda. You have some sort of an upfront agreement regarding kind of what you hope to accomplish on that call. You then typically move into a context set of context questions, not context for context's sake. These shouldn't be fluffy questions, but they're fact-based about, how large is your team, and what's your role within the company, or what's your tech stack. But they need to be relevant to your product, right? You just don't ask questions to ask questions about them. You want them to make sure that whatever context you're asking is relevant to the broader goal that you're trying to achieve. You then typically move into some kind of a discovery set of questions, which are more about the customer's goals, priorities, and pains, and then what they're hoping to achieve. That gives you an idea of how you can map your solution onto their problems. It's very diagnostic in nature. You then typically move into a decision part of the call, if you have time, which revolves around who are the other key stakeholders, what are your buying criteria, is there a timeline, is there a budget, et cetera, before moving into the close, which is sort of, depending on how the call goes, we either part ways as friends or you are setting the next steps and for the next call. So think of it in 5 parts. So a playbook helps to actually capture those key questions and key responses to those sections, but in a way that can help where the rep can help guide him or herself in the moment.
When I work with people, Rod, I commonly gravitate right to this, because lots of times people say, "Oh, I'm so bad at sales. I'm struggling with this." I'm like, "Well, let's just walk this out. What if you said this, and what if you said that?" And that kind of helps build their confidence, because they know ahead of what's going on, what's going to be said before it happens. There's downsides to that, though. I have a lot of people on the podcast, as you can guess.
Sure.
And they're of the notion of the problem with this is that you're building yourself kind of this set decision tree. If they say this, you say that. If they say that, you say this. Well, what if they don't? What if they say something third? Maybe it's really more about a mindset. And then you'll just kind of know from your heart what's the right thing to say. And then, of course, I've had a lot of people on most recently say, "Oh, no, what you should be doing is sharing stories." So, what?
Yeah, no,
how do you see all this? How do you know, Rod? Let me ask you this: how do you know this is true?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great question, and I think really quickly, the things that you just mentioned are all true to some extent, right? And so when you think about the role of a playbook, I think you need to think about them on a prospecting call. The reality is, it is a decision tree format, and that's just because if you think about the call, it's really a set of there's little mini conversion rates within a call.
Right, I picture a flow chart.
It is. In fact, we actually have a chart in our software that looks like a decision tree. We call it paths, and you essentially see you've got your talk track for the pitch, and then if you make it past that point, you see the 5 branches come out of it, and the branches light up as green or red, whether or not you set a meeting or not.
The thing is, though, people are goofy. And they don't necessarily go down paths you think they might.
No, I would say that from what we've seen, from our own experience, from our customers' experience, you can, with a high degree of accuracy, know what are the 4 or 5 most common paths you go down. You can always have another path, and you should, right? For that very reason, right? No one's entirely predictable. But the reality is, what the data shows is that when you run enough calls, you very quickly get to the 80-20 version of the typical responses, and you figure it out pretty quickly. And some of them you can figure it out before you do a single call. So that's how I would say on prospecting calls, I would say it is traditionally more linear and it is more decision tree like. On discovery calls, by the way, the goal is for the playbook is not just script out every scenario. The key word, as we say with playbooks, is to guide reps in the moments that matter. So the goal is not to read verbatim. The goal is not to sound like a robot. The goal is not to say that there are only 4 different ways a call can go. Having said that, and as I'm sure you can imagine, in almost any type of profession, whether it's if you're a doctor, if you're an athlete, if you're a musician, right? Everybody is always practicing and running some type of play in practice. If you're a surgeon, you end up operating on cadavers before you do a surgery, and it doesn't mean that everything you operate on is going to be the same as what you see, but you're kind of building, you're sort of building some muscle memory there. And you do that by practicing what are the most typical things I'm going to hear, and what are some best practice ways to respond to the moment. So, in essence, you're kind of figuring out there's the what of the call, and the what actually rarely changes. So, like how you ask, what you ask questions about. You're going to talk about context. You're going to do some discovery. You're going to do some decision stuff. Now, how you ask those questions is not always going to be the same, and it shouldn't be the same, right? You need to adapt to the profile of the person on the call. You need to adapt to what you're hearing on the call. And in many cases, playbooks can be dynamic and they can actually adapt to what you're hearing. But it doesn't mean you're saying the exact same words every single time. It doesn't mean you're doing the exact same thing every time. That's not the point. The point is to give you plays to run at the highest impact moments of a call, and to execute those extremely well.
So how would you recommend? Let's say, we got some listeners here, and they're trying to figure out how they would execute this in their lives. How would they approach this?
Absolutely. So it starts by coming up with your V1 of what are the top, what are the 10 things you want to know about a deal. So when you're
V1, version 1?
V1, version 1. So if you're a VP of sales, you're a sales leader, typically I want to know these 7 to 10 things about a deal. And those things can include, once again, what goals is the customer trying to achieve? What are the pains they have, right, that are preventing them from doing so? If we solve this problem, why is it good for them personally, professionally? What are some blockers? All those things, along with, like I said, budget, timeline, key stakeholders. Like there's a set of things that if you think about it, deal by deal, no matter what company where you work, you want to know those things. Put those things together, put them down in an outline, and come up with a basic question that helps you get at the answer to that topic. Don't overthink it. Literally just write down, I want to know these 10 things, break them down into context questions, discovery questions, decision questions, you're kind of done. The second step, and this is where some math is required, is you have to make sure you consistently get answers to those questions, right? Make sure your reps are asking them. And then put them through some kind of, you can either do the analysis by brute force, or you can do some analysis based off of, some algorithms which say, hey, these data points tend to have an outsized impact on whether you win or lose, right? So we've analyzed customer data for a customer out in San Francisco, showing that there's 3 questions that have an outsized impact on whether or not they win or lose a deal. And these questions can have different answers, right? So it's not just like yes, no. There's usually 5 or 6 different ways they can be answered.
Right.
And what they figure out is when someone answers a question this way, it has a negative impact on the probability of them going to the next stage.
Right.
So I'm going to stop there for a minute because this is a really important point. What we're basically saying is there are, in any given conversation, there are 3 or 4 high impact moments or questions that if you answer it one way, if a prospect answers it one way, it's a really good sign. Or if they answer it another way, it could be a negative sign. But the key point is it could be. It doesn't have to be. So once you've identified those questions and those negative answers, then as a sales leader, you have to say, do I think that a rep, if they hear this negative answer in the moment, do I think there's a way to recover from that? Is there a play they can run where they can say, it sounds like you think your problem is this, and in the back you might know, we don't really line up really well with solving that problem. But if we help them, think through, we've oftentimes heard people think that the problem is X, but when they dig deeper, what they really realize is the problem is Y, and Y happens to be the area where your company does really well. That's a recovery moment. If if you can reframe the problem by telling a story, which you mentioned earlier, which we love telling stories.
Right, some kind of insight.
Exactly. There's an insight. There's a reframing question to get them to think, right? Say, you know what? I haven't thought of, let me think about that for a second. You know what? You could be right. Doesn't mean you're going to get it every time. Doesn't mean you're going to change their perspective in an authentic way, right? The goal isn't to trick them into changing their mind. It's to say, yeah, I actually misdiagnosed my own problem. You're right. But if you can do that in real time, like at the time of the call versus afterwards when it's too late, you have a chance to really meaningfully move your close rate. And so that's really, if I were to describe in a nutshell, what Playbook should help you do. It should help your reps ask things consistently so that you can gather data to figure out what your winning plays are and what your critical moments are. And for those critical moments, making sure if you get an answer that isn't the best answer, is there a chance for a rep to educate that prospect or to reframe something so that they can actually change the outcome of that call and that deal when it matters most.
So how would they write this down over time? I almost feel like this might work for a very mature product. But if you're not as certain about a product, or you're rolling it out into down a market channel you never had before, or to a set market that you never had before, it seems like this isn't what you would do, or is this what you do and you iterate on it over time? And what would that look like? And I know,
yeah, it's a wonderful.
No, right. And I apologize. I just asked you like 5 questions in a row.
Yeah, no, totally. So I'll start by answering one, and then we can knock off the other ones. So I'll start with the end in mind, which is you kind of said the key word, and this is kind of important for everybody on the podcast. The iteration piece is critical. And what we and our best customers tend to do. So they have this playbook, and they have their approach to the call. They will do a couple things, right? They will look at the data after they've run enough calls to see, what is impacting, like I said, their win rates, and they'll identify those high impact questions, and they'll go back into the playbook, and they will get the team around a table and say, what are you learning? What tends to be the best approach here? And they'll debate it, and they'll put it in the playbook, and then everybody can have access to that best practice and run it. They might listen to calls. They might talk to reps, but the key is they're using quantitative data as well as qualitative data, like i.e. listening to reps, talking to reps, listening to calls, to then find the best possible tactics, right, to run on the call, and then they put them in the playbook for everyone to run. So it's just that iterative loop. You build the playbook, you run it, you learn, you iterate, you run it again, you learn some more, you iterate. So it's that loop, and that's just a critical thing to do because the markets are dynamic and products are dynamic, and so you have to do that. So that's the iteration piece, and that's how you do it. But you have to run some plays first before you can figure out what works and what doesn't.
What would this look like?
In terms of when you say what does it look like, which piece?
Well, okay, we're talking about 7 different paths. Let's just say it's on a piece of paper. I can see myself going. Oh, hang on, sir. Let me go to question number 7. Oh, okay, now we need to go to question number 3. And there'll be a lot of paper moving around. Or I got this on the machine, or is this a little float? How does this look? What does this look like?
No, it's a wonderful question. So, before we started the company, right, we went out and did 40 customer interviews at large companies like Salesforce and Adobe, and smaller companies as well. And the people that tried to do this tried to use playbooks on the call. They would use Google Docs or Post-it notes or whatever.
Right.
Those to your point, or actually one of our customers in Utah, they actually have a beautiful 75-page PDF playbook where in a binder, and it actually sounds just like that. We watched them try and use their playbook on a call, and it was pretty brutal to watch, quite frankly. It was literally sounded like the ruffling of papers you were just doing. That's why we have software. Software makes it much easier to have a single pane of glass to access the key questions you want to ask. If you want to move to another question, you're clicking versus shuffling. It's one click, one motion. If you need access to customer stories or objections, they're one click away, but hidden otherwise. So this software makes that problem go away if it's built the right way. So that's the quick. It's a little bit of a self-serving answer, right? But that's what our product helps people do.
I'm somewhat skeptical. I have to admit, I would be. Probably some of my listeners are too. So it would be very hard on a call to know how to unless you were really well trained, and you really knew it inside and out. I'm afraid this is my fear.
Sure.
That they're not listening. That they're not genuinely listening to what the customer's saying. And because you kind of know the direction that you're going down in a Socratic kind of way, right? Socrates knew the path that he's going down, so he's just asking lots of questions. That I'm afraid that this might get lost. Like, so I just can't help but feeling like this is going to require just a ton of training. And if that's it, that's the answer. That's the answer.
Sure. No, you're voicing a common objection pre-sale, interestingly, we found the opposite, and I'll explain why. So when you think in general about today, a year ago, two years ago, or any time in the past, when a rep is on a call, think about how much multitasking that rep has to do. So I'm talking to you. I don't know, you don't know who I am, and vice versa. I have to know what to ask. I have to listen to the response. I have to try and take notes. At the same time, I need to try and recall what is the best next thing for me to ask or say based on what I just heard. So there's some synthesis. Do I have to recall a story that makes sense, that's relevant to the pain or the thing that the person just told me, or recall the right best practice to handle an objection, or, et cetera, do a recall of the best value prop in response to what persona I'm talking to. Humans are terrible at multitasking, and yet we ask reps to do like 4 or 5 things at once on a call. So think about it this way. We're taking away at least 1 or 2 of those things for them to do so they can actually focus more on the prospect. And I'm not just telling you this to say like, this is it. When we talk to customers, we literally ask this question every time. And the consistent response has been, I'm now the rep. I'm actually more dialed into the call because I don't have to worry about what I'm asking. It's right in front of my face.
Interesting.
Counter to it, and it's not a
well,
like literally like
I had a guy on just before you. I had a guy on a couple weeks ago, John Reed, would have totally disagreed with you. It'd been fun to get the two of you guys on at the same time. He would be all about the mindset.
It's not even about me. It's like it's not about me. It's talk to the rep, right? Like I'm not the one who's saying this. I'm literally telling you what we hear from our customers.
Right.
In our usage metrics and whatnot would also indicate that that's not the case.
Interesting. What is your guys' background? I probably should have asked that from the get-go.
Oh, sure. So Frank Dale is my co-founder. We have both been, we have similar backgrounds in that we've both, been operators and startups for like the last, 7 to 10 years. I've been a COO primarily. He's been a CEO. He has a sales and marketing background. I've got more of a ops and product background. So very complementary on that front. But we both run go-to-market teams, and we both have had the problem that we're trying to solve, which is, how to help reps, right, be as consistent as possible on the call and be excellent in the, like I said, the critical moments that matter, because those critical moments are what drive the ability to move a sale forward. The story I like to tell is I could tell you all the stats behind my calls when I was running sales ops. I could say for every 100 calls you make, you get to the decision maker this percentage of the time, and get to a demo this percent, and get to a close this percent. But what I couldn't tell you was what do I need to do to actually go impact those conversion rates. And we built a piece of software that helps teams literally see what the levers are so they can go and work with the reps to make improvements in their sales conversations.
Got it. Rod, how can people find you guys online?
Sure. You can find us on our website, which is A-N-D, Costello, COSTELLO.com. You can find everything you'd like to on our website. We also have a number of materials in our resources section that are free that help you understand how to create a playbook for discovery calls and ask the right questions, and gives you a whole rundown of exactly how to do it. So it's very tactical. And you can take it. A lot of our customers and prospects have actually used it to create their V1 or that version 1 of a playbook before they even talk to us.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Rod. I really appreciate you coming visiting us here on Sales Babble.
Pat, thanks for having me.
I think it's interesting how the playbooks juxtapose against the idea of a mindset-driven process. In my consulting, I've found scripts can be quite helpful. Sometimes a key phrase or word can make all the difference. The trick is to do both, to have a script that boosts your confidence, yet have a mindset that allows you to jump off script when it's clear you need to look at the deal from a different perspective. To connect with Rod and his company Costello, you can go to the show notes at www.salesbabbel.com/253. And next week, we're going to go a bit deeper into automation with our guest Dave Gerhardt at drift.com. And you're going to talk about how they use bots to start a conversation with a prospect and then hand it off to a rep. Automation for the selling process. Don't miss it. Did you find value in this podcast? If so, please share with your friends. This is the best way that Sales Babble can grow. The way all podcasts grow is through word of mouth. If you got a question or a comment, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Go to salesbabbel.com, click the Babble Me button, and you're welcome to ask me a question. Or if you're on LinkedIn, ask me a question there. I am there all the time. More than happy to chat. Well, that's all I got for this week, folks. Until next week, take care and have a highly successful and profitable selling day.
D you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabbel.com.